Today's meandering drive in northeastern New Mexico is a clinic on how traveling can be all about the journey and not about the destination whatsoever. The scenery from some obscure New Mexico highways was constantly varied and surprising, and I thought I knew the state, but I didn't know any of this. It was an overcast morning in Dumas, Texas when we set out for the state line. Usually on a road trip, I don't like to retrace steps, but returning for a second look at the always amazing New Mexico suited me fine. First we had to get through the rest of the Texas Panhandle, but I dug the sense of distance and the huge agricultural structures along US Highway 87. And I know I've been saying this a lot lately, but the weather kept changing today, a lot. One of the liveliest sky days we've had. At the New Mexico state line, it was getting sunnier than Texas had been, but it wouldn't last. But anyway, I was ecstatic to be back. It's not just the fascinating little towns like Clayton, it's the New Mexico landscape. We've seen the fir tree covered mountains of Gila National Forest to the west, and white sands in the desert around Roswell to the south. This northeast corner was completely new to me. Endless green meadows and golden hills, big enough to watch the cloud shadows creeping along the ground over the grazing cows. We drove slowly and annoyed the other drivers to stay ready at all times to pull over or make a U-turn when we noticed something. Photo opportunities seemed to extend all the time in every direction around us, 360 degrees. Cattle branding became a running theme of the day, especially at the next stop, Gladstone Mercantile. I couldn't tell exactly what Gladstone even is. There's a post office here, but there didn't seem to be any community or structures beside this store. The post office turned out to have closed years ago. It's still open as a sort of museum with things like, well, cattle branding on pieces of leather, somewhere between a local culture display and a souvenir stand. The attached store was full of interesting curios, both handmade items and flea market-like antiques. It's actually a great look at the history of this part of the US, like a $10 note from the Republic of Texas, or Lily Maria Martinez's 3-month prostitution license from 1875, onto which Sheriff Reinhardt himself set his hand and caused the seal of the city to be affixed. I gave in to fate and, inspired by all the cattle branding, bought a unique t-shirt from Gladstone Mercantile, knowing that I'll never meet anyone else who has one like it. We also commemorated being back in the Southwest with our first jar of cactus jelly in weeks. Outside there was a great spot for a picnic lunch. Blood sugar was a tad high and the air was a tad cold, but where else can you have a picnic quite like this? I mean, really, where else out here can you even stop for a picnic? Thanks, Gladstone. In the town of Roy, we made a fateful decision to go out of our way to avoid the interstate to our destination, the small city of Las Vegas, New Mexico. So we turned, awkwardly, onto Highway 419, one of the tinier little lines on the map. Immediately, this road dropped into a rocky, shrub-filled canyon. None of this even seemed possible after the acres of green prairies along the main highway. I kept an eye on some spooky-looking storms ahead and wound the car through hairpin curves, around red rocks and yellow grasses, and watched the shifting clouds and wondering if we'd get deluged with that rain or veer off into more sunshine. At the bottom of all this landscape, we passed over the Canadian River. It's the largest tributary of the Arkansas River and the 13th longest river in the US, and I bet not many people see it at this point. We eventually climbed back out of the canyon and made it back to the straight roads again, and all their various promises and hassles. A light rain hit as we entered the city of Las Vegas, much smaller than the famous city in Nevada with the same name, but with an infamous and fascinating Wild West history. It was an important railroad stop in the 1800s, still is for Amtrak, and notorious for the famous outlaws that hung out on its rough east side. It's quieter now, of course, and we stopped for the night at the Thunderbird Motel. A real honest-to-goodness old-school motor lodge, a simple little square room to rest one night for the passing wanderer. My dinner imagination failed again, and it was Long John Silver. And the final weather change of the day. The buildings of Las Vegas were now lit up by the sun's rays slanting in from the west. Have I mentioned that I always enjoy the scenes in New Mexico? Tomorrow is packed with stuff. The whole reason we came to Las Vegas was to set up a visit for Santa Fe, New Mexico, but we decided the last minute to go to Abiquiu tomorrow and see the Georgia O'Keeffe home and studio instead. After that, it's the Ghost Ranch, and then a heart-stopping view from the Rio Grande Gorge Bridge and Taos. How does New Mexico do it?